We'll go ahead and get started now. Thank you for joining the webinar. My name is Krina Vasiliou and I oversee marketing initiatives for LIM. As I mentioned earlier, please note that all participant lines are muted. Please use the Q&A functionality in the WebEx interface to submit any questions. Please also note that you will not be able to see other participants who are attending the webinar. Only the host, the presenter, and the panelist will be displayed on your list. The webinar will provide an analytical look at some of the factors that impact the OTC float price based on ISO peak and off-peak averages. We hope that at the end of the webinar you'll walk away with a thorough, data-driven approach at looking at price fluctuations for power contracts. The differentiating factor we believe for this webinar is the rich data that we use in coming up with our results. Our presenter today is Mike Jensen. Mike is a senior technical trainer with LIM, and he specializes in building analytical models and templates for our clients and prospects. Before we actually delve into the model and the analysis, we'd like to acknowledge that we are not making any trading forecasts or recommendations during this webinar. This webinar is only meant to showcase data, and LIM does not assume responsibility, nor is it liable for the accuracy, completeness, or timeliness of the information or any action or decision taken as a result of this data. Now that we got the legal concerns out of the way, let's briefly look at who LIM is and why we're considered the industry standard for data quality and accuracy. For those of you who haven't heard of us before, we hope to just give you a quick preview of the value we add to our clients through our data management processes. We are a leading provider of data, analytics, and research, and we're primarily focused on the commodities and the energy markets. We aggregate data from over 200 sources and run it through a very rigorous QA process that includes over 45 different checks. We then package the data, what we call the LIM certified clean data, and deliver it to our clients. Our products and tools are as complex or as simple as you need them to be. We provide a large spectrum of solutions customized for your needs. Anything from an Excel add-in tool that easily brings data into your native Excel to hosted models that are scalable for large organizations, or tools that integrate into your risk or downstream systems. For those actually interested in more information about LIM, we'll be happy to provide additional comments after the webinar. With this, I will actually turn it over to Mike to introduce the tool that we used to build the model and run the analysis today, as well as walk you through the assumption and results of the webinar. Mike?
Thank you. So as Krina was saying about the tool, for this particular analysis I chose the LIM add-in. It's built on a .NET framework. It runs in a user's native Excel environment. A nice feature about this particular tool is it's completely built on web services. It accesses a cloud or a server that we have sitting in the cloud, so I can literally grab data from this particular server anywhere I have an internet connection. So I guess before we jump too deep here, I'm going to just go over a couple quick goals that I wanted people to kind of take out of this webinar. I'm going to go in and kind of etch out in the sand exactly what I'm going to describe. We'll hop over to Excel and we'll see how I actually did it within the Excel environment. Come back to PowerPoint to wrap up the rest of the analyses, draw some conclusions, take some questions, and send everyone on their way. So with that, the first thing I kind of want to look at here is the first goal, I should say, is I want to assess how ISO LMP postings in the first 10 days of February affect the BALMOs or balance of month contracts for the remainder of the month. And I guess just to set up some qualifiers here, I chose the first 10 days simply because this is the 10th day of the month, and I chose February just because this is February. So there's no rhyme or reason why I chose the 10th of February as my cutoff point. Secondly, I just want to provide everyone on the call with a model that can be used as a starting point for further analysis. So by no means did I take everything into account solving all the world's electricity problems, or I'm just looking at a very narrow subset of data that I particularly chose to use. I just chose it randomly. I looked at hubs that have a lot of trading activity on them, and those were the ones I used within the study. And once you look at it, maybe you'll generate some ideas, and you can kind of take it and run with it from there. And lastly, I just wanted to give about a 10-second introduction to the lim add-in once we're within Excel, and just give you a brief idea how it works and how I actually grabbed all this data in there in a user-friendly format. So with that, I'm going to go over the questions that the questions that I started, or I want this webinar to answer. The first being, do spikes in the peak or off-peak averages in the first 10 days of February affect the settlement prices of the balance of month contracts? And by spikes, I just mean a divergence. So it could be a spike to the positive, or it could be a spike to the negative. Whenever there's a discrepancy between the particular ICE OTC contract and the actual postings on the ISO, whenever there's a divergence there, I want to look at what the settlement of the particular OTC contract was, and I want to try to figure out why there was such a discrepancy in the first 10 days of the month and it converged at the last 2/3 of the month. And secondly, I wanted to look at other factors impacting these settlement prices. So I brought in 2 or 3 other factors that I thought might play a role drawing to these settlement prices, and we'll look to see how they affect throughout the remainder of the webinar. The screenshot itself, I'm using the Eastern Interconnect. That's where I chose Synergy Hub in MISO, the Western Hub in PJM, and the Mass Hub in New England ISO. So this is, again, just a map of geographically where I'm talking about. So just to give a quick background on what a BALMO contract is, it stands for balance a month. I'm sure it has many other names that I'm not privy to. And what it essentially is as a day in the month passes, more of a floating price of the contract becomes realized. So it's a little bit different than a NYMEX natural gas or crude oil contract in that that particular contract isn't realized throughout the month, meaning they just operate differently, I guess. As each day in the month passes, this contract, more and more this contract becomes realized. More and more of it, it essentially loses days of a floating price as you go through the month. So just to kind of give a quick example of that, if a month were 30 days long and it's the 10th day of the month, 1/3 of the floating price would be realized, meaning 1/3 would be set in stone what it's going to be, and there would be 2/3 that are unrealized. There's 2/3 of the month that the prices can kind of move in whichever direction they want, which ultimately are going to determine the settlement price at the end of the month of the contract. So now more specifically, because BALMO contracts are, it's just a term for a particular type of contract. In this case, we're looking at the electricity contracts. And these contract size and everything I'm going to describe, this is specific to ICE. I didn't look at any other exchanges. I just took ICE data. So if you're looking for more information on any of these particular contracts I'm talking about, you can just go to the ICE website and look up the product. And if you're looking at a different balance month contracts, they might operate completely differently. But without further ado, the contract sizes of the ICE contracts I was looking at, the peak is at 800 megawatt, the off-peak is a 50 megawatt, and the daily close, or the floating price, each day of the particular OTC contract by ICE is calculated by them. So I believe what they do is they take a volume-weighted trade average of, it might be like the last 30 seconds of the day, to figure out what that close price or settlement price is for the day. But the contract settlement, what that particular contract actually settles off of, is the average of the hourly LMPs for peak and off-peak hours in every calendar day in the settlement month. And this is taken directly off the ICE website. So this is kind of an important point, because this is really what's linking these ISO prices and the ICE prices together. That the ICE prices settle off what the ISO is publishing on their website at the end of the month for either all the peak hours or all the off-peak hours is two different entities, and it will become more apparent as I kind of go through the analysis of the linking between these. It's quite critical. So I'm just going to jump into kind of what data I used, how I did it within the Excel environment, and then we'll step to actually Excel to see it kind of go live fire. So the particular data I'm looking at, again, is the ICE OTC prices for SIN Hub, Mass Hub, and Western Hub in February. I'm looking at real-time and day-ahead prices for both peak and off-peak in, again, the three different ISOs that I'm looking at in February over the last 5 years. Chose the last 5 years because that's really all the history I could dig up on ICE of these particular contracts. And as I mentioned before in the second question, I brought in a couple other relevant things I might thought affect the market. One of those being NOAA weather, so just free government data weather that's published on their website I'm grabbing, and again I'm taking all this through the lim add-in and throwing it into Excel, so I don't have to like go out and dig through different websites to grab this stuff. So once I get it all into Excel, I graph the OTC contracts month over month and compare it amongst the hubs. So I'm looking at, February of 06 on top of February of 07 on top of February of 08 for like the Synergy Hub. Then I compared the Synergy Hub with what the 06, 07, 08 look like with the Mass Hub and the Western Hub, see if there's any differences or big discrepancies. And the reason why I'm doing this is I'm just looking to see if the ISOs themselves behave differently for these three different points. And after I've identified those instances, I kind of go through and then I identify where the actual discrepancies occur. So I'm not looking at like on a daily basis when there's a big discrepancy. I'm looking at a particular year. So I'm looking at, was there a discrepancy in February 2006? Yes or no. Was there a discrepancy in February 2007? Yes or no. So I'm not looking at like hundreds of different results where we're looking at a daily or an hourly basis to see where these discrepancies occur. I'm just defining years. And lastly, the output that I'm looking for is comparing the ICE contract settlements to the price of the particular contract on February 10th. I'm looking for fluctuations, determining the correlation between the peak and off-peak average, or what correlation, if any, they have on the actual ICE settlements. And I'm looking at the other drivers again, one of them being weather, one of them being fuel costs. And we'll kind of see that play through as I go through the model here. So this is just the reminder slide to tell me to jump to Excel.